Before cryptocurrency promised to move money across borders without banks, before wire transfers made international payments instant, before anyone dreamed of a global financial network, there was a system so sophisticated that it moved fortunes across 4,000 miles of desert, mountains, and hostile territory, without a single coin changing hands. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route, it was the world's first decentralized financial system, and the people who ran it understood something we only now rediscovering. You don't need to move money to transfer wealth. You just need trust. Welcome to the Money Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. When most people hear Silk Road, they picture caravans loaded with silk, spices, and exotic goods trudging across Central Asia. And that's partly true. But beneath that romantic image was a financial problem so massive it should have been impossible to solve. How do you conduct trade across continents when every region has different currencies, different rulers, different laws, and bandits lurking on every stretch of road? How do you send payment from Tianjin to Rome when carrying gold means risking your life, and local coins are worthless 100 miles from where they were minted? The answer came from an unlikely source, not emperors or generals, but merchants, money changers, and middlemen who built a financial infrastructure more advanced than most governments of their time. They created something revolutionary: letters of credit, promissory notes, and banking networks that could move wealth across the known world without moving a single physical coin. They invented international finance, and they did it 1,000 years before Europe caught up. The Silk Road wasn't one road, it was a vast network of routes connecting China, Central Asia, Persia, India, and the Mediterranean world, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Rome. At its peak between the 2nd century BCE and the 14th century CE, it was the circulatory system of the ancient world, pumping goods, ideas, religions, and money across 3 continents. But the physical logistics were brutal: months of travel through scorching deserts and freezing mountain passes, constant threat of robbery, unstable political borders, and no central authority to enforce contracts or protect merchants. This created an impossible paradox. Trade required trust, but the distances were too vast for personal relationships. Merchants needed to send payment ahead or receive credit, but they had no way to verify if promises made in Samarkand would be honored in Damascus. Currency was regional Chinese copper cash, Persian silver drams, Byzantine gold solidi, and none of them had value beyond their home territories. Carrying large amounts of metal was dangerous and impractical. A merchant might load a caravan with silk in China, sell it in Persia, then need to buy spices to bring back, but how do you transfer that wealth across thousands of miles? Enter the Sogdians. If the Silk Road was the world's first global economy, the Sogdians were its first international bankers. Based in Central Asia, in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, they were intermediaries by geography and genius by necessity. They spoke multiple languages, they understood multiple currencies, they built trading colonies in every major city along the route from China to Persia to Constantinople, and critically, they created the infrastructure that made long-distance finance possible. The Sogdians didn't invent banking. That honor goes to Mesopotamian temples, but they perfected something more powerful: correspondent banking. Here's how it worked. A merchant in China wants to buy goods in Persia but doesn't want to carry gold across 3,000 miles of dangerous territory. So he goes to a Sogdian agent in Chang'an, hands over his payment in local currency, and receives a written letter of credit, essentially a promissory note. This letter travels with his caravan or courier. When it reaches Persia, another Sogdian agent, often a family member or trusted partner, honors the note and pays out in local currency. No gold crossed borders. No coins were stolen by bandits. The money moved through trust and record keeping. This system required something more valuable than gold: reputation. The Sogdians operated on a principle that modern bankers still recognize: your credit is only as good as your word. Defaulting on a letter of credit didn't just ruin one transaction, it destroyed your family's business across the entire network. So Sogdian banking families maintained meticulous records, honored their commitments, and built multi-generational reputations for reliability. They were trusted because they had to be. In a world without legal enforcement or central banks, trust was currency. But they weren't the only ones. In the Islamic world, a parallel system emerged: the hawala network. As Islam spread across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Asia after the 7th century, Muslim merchants faced the same problem. How do you move money across the vast Islamic caliphate without physically transporting it? Their answer was hawala, an honor-based system of transferring funds through a network of brokers. You deposit money with a hawala dealer in Baghdad, and your business partner withdraws it from a dealer in Delhi, connected by nothing more than a code or token and a shared ledger system. No banks, no government oversight, just trust, enforced by reputation and community ties. Hawala worked because Islamic commercial law, based on Sharia principles, provided a common legal framework across different regions. Contracts were taken seriously, debt was enforceable, and most importantly, the merchant class formed tight-knit communities where word of dishonesty spread fast. If you cheated in one city, you were blacklisted everywhere. This created a self-regulating financial system that was faster, cheaper, and more efficient than physically moving coins. Even today, hawala networks still operate across the Middle East and South Asia, largely unchanged for over a millennium. Meanwhile, Chinese merchants developed their own solution, flying money, during the Tang and Song dynasties. Chinese traders used a system called fakian, literally, flying cash, which allowed merchants to deposit funds with government-authorized agents and receive paper certificates redeemable elsewhere. This was essentially an early form of paper money, backed not by gold but by the government's guarantee and the merchant's credit. By the 9th century, China had effectively created a proto-banking system that eliminated the need to carry heavy copper coins on long journeys. The innovation was so successful that it eventually evolved into the world's first true paper currency under the Song dynasty. What's remarkable is that these systems, Sogdian letters of credit, Islamic hawala, Chinese flying money, all emerged independently but operated on the same core principle. Wealth is information, not metal. You do not need to physically move gold or silver if you have a trusted network that can keep accurate records and honor obligations. This was a conceptual breakthrough that predated European banking by centuries. While medieval Europe was still operating on barter and hoarding precious metals, the Silk Road had already figured out how to make money move at the speed of information. And it wasn't just about moving money. These financial networks enabled something more profound: risk sharing and investment. Merchants formed partnerships where capital was pooled, profits were shared, and losses were distributed. Islamic finance developed the concept of mudaraba, a partnership where one party provides capital and another provides expertise, splitting profits according to agreed terms. Chinese merchants used a similar system called hihuo. These weren't just business arrangements, they were early forms of venture capital, enabling large-scale trade expeditions that no single merchant could afford alone. The Silk Road's financial system also created a form of credit that functioned like modern bonds. Merchants would advance money to producers, silk weavers in China, spice growers in India, craftsmen in Persia in exchange for future delivery of goods. This allowed production to scale up, smoothed out seasonal fluctuations, and created long-term commercial relationships. It was a proto-futures market, operating across continents, based entirely on reputation and trust. But here's the thing about trust-based systems: they're incredibly efficient until they're not. The Silk Road's financial networks worked because they were relatively closed communities, Sogdian families, Muslim merchant guilds, Chinese trade associations where everyone knew everyone, or knew someone who knew someone. Reputation mattered because the world was small enough for word to travel. But as trade expanded and networks grew, the system became vulnerable. The Medici banking empire was built on principles that Silk Road merchants had perfected centuries earlier. Even the concept of double-entry bookkeeping, often credited to medieval Italy, may have roots in the accounting practices of Central Asian and Chinese merchants. And this is where the story turns from ancient history to an uncomfortable reflection of the present. Because the financial innovation of the Silk Road didn't disappear, it evolved. The same principles that allowed merchants to move wealth across continents 1,000 years ago are now the foundation of the global financial system. Wire transfers, letters of credit, correspondent banking, credit default swaps, they are all variations on the theme of moving value through networks of trust rather than physical exchange. Even cryptocurrency, which promises to disrupt traditional banking, is essentially a return to Silk Road principles: decentralized networks, trustless transactions verified by consensus rather than central authority, value that exists as information rather than physical tokens. Bitcoin enthusiasts talk about being your own bank and eliminating intermediaries, but the Sogdians and hawala dealers figured that out in the 8th century. They just used ledger books and reputation instead of blockchain. The difference is scale. The Silk Road's financial networks operated within relatively small closed communities where trust was personal and reputations were closely guarded. Modern finance operates at global scale with anonymous participants and complex instruments that obscure who owes what to whom. We've gained efficiency and reach, but we've lost the accountability that made the old systems work. When a Sogdian banker defaulted, his family's reputation was destroyed. When a modern financial institution fails, it gets bailed out with taxpayer money. Here's what the story of the Silk Road's hidden bankers teaches us. The technology changes, but the fundamentals don't. Whether you're using clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, paper notes in Tang Dynasty China, or blockchain in the 21st century, finance is ultimately about trust, information, and the ability to enforce obligations. The Silk Road merchants understood that money doesn't have to be physical, it just has to be credible. And they built a system that moved fortunes across continents without a central bank, without government backing, and without modern technology. They did it with reputation, relationships, and meticulous record-keeping. So the next time you hear about innovations in fintech, or debates about cryptocurrency, or the future of banking, remember the Silk Road. Remember that decentralized finance isn't new. Remember that moving value without moving physical currency isn't a 21st century invention. And remember that the most sophisticated financial system is unnecessarily the one with the most technology at S, the one that solves the trust problem. If this changed how you see money, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.